500? Herb looks really good for 500. Oh, wait, sorry, 500th episode.
Hey guys, time for this week's episode of Pensado's Place. You're going to meet the brilliant Susan Rogers, a seminal part of everything Prince, and learn how panning can help your relationship. Seriously, it's pretty amazing. But first, major congratulations to Harvey Mason Jr. and the Grammys. As we tape this, it's the day after the Grammys. I thought it was a really entertaining show, creatively executed with fantastic performances. They managed this COVID thing the best of any award show I've seen to date. Friends of ours like Anderson .Paak, Phineas, Fantastic Negrito, Jack Antonoff, Neil Pogue, Rob Kinelski, and many, many more. Well done, and we are all proud of you. Now in the exciting news department, we've got two items. First, check out the new iZotope Music Production Suite Pro. 30 plugins like RX, Nectar, Ozone, all pro level, which means free updates and tutorials, EQs, compression, DSPs, only $25 a month. A 7-day free trial. It is absolute fire. Go to the link below or go to iZotope.com. Do not delay. Check this out. And now for item 2, iZotope and Native Instruments have created an alliance. Now, what does that mean? It means great products for you if you're a musician, a producer, engineer, or all of the creators. They are an absolute natural fit together. They have complementary strengths. You got iZotope's machine learning powered assisted technology. We've been to their shop. It's really amazing. And Native Instruments, you know, their legendary innovations. Instrument sounds, hardware. These two have created this alliance, and it is going to be great for all kinds of creatives. They will collaborate, come up with new product, but also maintain enough independence so that they don't get lost in each thing. Look for technology to be unlocked. Look for you to be the beneficiary. I have spoken to both chairmen, Mark and Con, and they are super excited, and we're super excited for them. Hopefully we're going to have them on the show soon. So, hit us up on all our socials, like and subscribe, sign up for our newsletter, and without further ado, this OG, which means original goddess, will absolutely blow your mind. Literally, please meet the amazing Susan Rogers.
Welcome, Susan.
Hi, thank you for having me on, and hi to the folks who are listening or watching. It's a fun conversation, you know, this conversation that we're about to have about music. I've been talking with musicians and scientists, in some cases, about music for 43 years now. Mm-hmm. And I was just saying to Dave before we logged on, it never grows old. There's always new stuff to talk about. It's always exciting.
And you know, the fun part, you are actually on the day we are celebrating our 500th episode. Been doing this for 10 years in almost 200 countries, and that's been the length and breadth of the interest in our space. We've all spent some time in it. So after 43 years from your position as, you know, your active left brain, right brain, you have been a creative person and you're a teaching person. When you sit now and you're amongst young people who are interested in this and you're teaching, you know, things that have to do with cognition and listening and all kinds of stuff, are you encouraged about where it's going and what's happening in the music space?
I haven't been this encouraged in many, many years. Many, many years. What's happening in music today is fantastic. I love the hybridization that's going on now. I think it feels to me like we have finally figured out how to use the new tools. It's been a generation, but now those new tools have been around for a generation. Folks know how to make art with them in a way that is demystified.
Mm-hmm.
And the result, I think, has been absolutely fantastic. I'm excited about music. Now, 10 years ago, we were worried about the business end of it. And 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we were worried that music is ridiculously conservative. On the charts anyway. It just seems like, come on, where's the innovation? That innovation has finally taken root. And what we've got going on now is, I think, better than it's been in a generation or more.
I agree totally.
The thing that we often preach on the show, we use the same word, which is we're now at a point where being a hybrid becomes really critical to you moving forward. Borrowing and while we always borrowed and exchanged from other genres and learn from others, the tools make it even more accessible, but we caution people that you have to learn to use the tools and not have the tools use you. You can get locked into being just a tool user and think that you're ahead of the game. And then you take out the human component where your heart speaks and your passion speaks and your ears speak. Do you find that you need to remind people, teach people, or bring that back up? Does that come into play in your world?
Well, my world today is the world of college. So I'm in front of people all day who are just starting their careers. And as all beginners must do, whether they're in chemistry or they're in painting, they learn their craft first, because you need to teach your hands and your brain how to push sound around or push paint around on canvas or push fabric around. If you're a fashion designer, you need to learn your craft so that you can realize your artistic ideas, so that you've got enough craftsmanship under your belt that you can make anything that you can imagine in your mind's eye or ear. So we focus on craft in college with the firm belief that our students are going to have enough original thought in them that their artistry will emerge. Once they're out of school, once they're past this beginner's phase, they'll express themselves, but they'll be loaded with craftsmanship and practice and some practical knowledge to help them realize their vision. Not all artists do it that way. As we know, some folks have such a full can of whoop-ass and so much artistry going on, so many ideas. I think Prince was one of them. They figure out the craft as they go along and let the chips fall where they may. But for the majority of us, and that includes the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, you go off, you woodshed, you learn your craft first. Your art, if you've got any in you, it'll come out.
Susan, why is it that, and this is the question I get asked the most, and I have difficulty even understanding, much less answering it. The human brain is, according to you, at what I've read, is designed to not want to hear or see or have anything new involved in their life. So then I get a demo, and so I've got to fight the damn demo because of the construction of the human brain. To prove a point, you said that you've listened to a song and on first listen you didn't like it, but on multiple listens you really liked it then at that point in time. So I guess the process for us engineers is how do we get them to listen to our version of the demo multiple times? But explain what goes on in the brain, because I think that's a bit of a foundation for most of the music cognition that you study. You know.
This is such interesting stuff. And boy, I wish I had known about it when I was making records. So there's a biologist named Medawar, P.D. Medawar, and he said the human brain treats a new idea the way the human body treats a new protein. It rejects it. We evolved to be suspicious of novelty. So anything that's brand new, we're like, not sure. But the more music you've listened to over your lifetime, and this is an amazing thing, the more music you've listened to over your lifetime, the more your auditory cortex, which is just right here above your ears, is shaped based on what you found rewarding in the past. So you're a little kid and you're listening to music and you're starting to figure out, I like this, I don't like that, but you're a little kid, so you're open-minded to some stuff that's in the middle, and you're developing your taste as you come up as a record listener and as in some cases as a record maker. So you're forming and shaping your auditory cortex to be more and more receptive to what good is. I loved it when Greg Wells came and visited our campus maybe 5 years ago, and he said to the students, you guys sitting here today, you have no idea how good is. Good is ridiculously good in the studios out there. So for those of us who've been record makers, we've heard so many great performances, so many great sounds, so many great mixes, so many great records that our auditory cortexes have a template, pretty strong one, to recognize good. So we can make more rapid judgments when we hear a new record for the first time. We know right away we can listen to the rhythm, we can listen to the mix, we can listen to the lyrics, the melody, the counter melodies, and we can say, yeah, this fits my neurological concept of good, or it doesn't. Yeah. And that makes us more judgmental than we were when we were young. Yeah. It can be a good thing and a bad thing. Yeah, it develops over time. As another scientist said, everything is the way it is because it got that way. So we become more and more judgmental as we get older, but it got that way.
You said that that we all have a window of preferred taste in terms of tempo, timbre. Is that universal, or is that different from person to person?
Yeah, it's totally unique. So just as we have our own set of appetites for food, some people like things more salty and some more sweet and some more crunchy and others a little bit smoother. We developed this based on experiences of things that happened in the past. Did we have an experience with food when we were very young that was particularly rewarding? If so, once you're rewarded, those reward pathways are going to fire up. You're going to release some dopamine, and you're going to associate that food with those feel-good neurotransmitters. And it's the same thing with music. So if, I'll give you an example from my own life. I think it was just 8 or 9 years old, and an older cousin came over the house. He was maybe 11, and he had some 45s, and, the whole family's in the living room, and in the stereo, he put on Papa's Got a Brand New Bag by James Brown. Mm-hmm. And you know what kids do, they kind of gather together and they dance. As soon as I heard that, dun, 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 it felt so good, in part because the setting was great. With family, there's an older cousin whom we all think is the hip kid in the family, and he's showing us these new records. So I associated, as through the process that all of us use, James Brown, Papa's Got a Brand New Bag.
That's good.
Good feelings, yeah. And the same thing happened hearing Sly Stone and Al Green, and then there might have been other situations in high school or when young, when I might have heard progressive rock or something like that with kids who weren't really the kind of kids that I normally hung out with, not necessarily my people, didn't get that reward happening, and consequently didn't feel as bonded to that genre of music as I did to the ones that had given me rewards in the past. So it develops slowly, but it takes root over time.
So I think what I'm hearing is that I should have my clients come over, serve them great meals, get them liquored up, play them my mix like 20 or 30 times, and provide them with chemical enhancement, and then I'll get my way. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. It will be harder. The older your listeners are, the harder it will be. But yeah, as one of my advisors used to say, the whole brain is always processing things, the whole brain. Mm-hmm. So as you're listening to music, you're seeing things, you're feeling things, your whole system is integrating what you're hearing with all your other sensory modalities. Mm-hmm. So these things do get kind of locked together, especially when we're young. And that's why we tend to bond to the music that we like the best in our teens.
Well, speaking of a developed audio cortex, when you research your work with Prince, the clarity that this 24-year-old used to come in the studio and record by himself because he knew what he wanted, the speed at which he would go, he knew what to edit and subtract and not get in. He didn't need two machines to do something. 24 tracks were fine. That I always say that genius finds its way to simplicity, and that people don't understand how complicated that is. Talk about that, about Prince and what you learned from watching that.
Prince was truly a very special case as a musician's brain goes. I was on a panel with Dylan Dresdow, who's an engineer who worked with Prince in the early 2000s. And Dylan said something I've never forgotten. He said, you had to unlearn Prince after you had to unlearn Prince because most people didn't think the way he did. Most people didn't have his abilities. So he was so facile on so many different instruments. It was hard to believe that someone who could play drums like that could also play bass like that and guitar like that and keys like that and write like that and sing like that, that he could do that bam, 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 going from one instrument to the other. And on top of that, that he had a mind, it was like a watchmaker's in terms of fitting together the arrangement as he went along. So in the years when I was with him in the 80s, we always worked 24-track analog, and he had a sense of what the future arrangement would be as he's adding new parts. He knew how to leave space for melody, for harmony, for counter melody, for all the rhythm elements. He knew what his melodic line was going to be with his vocals, so he knew before he even sang the vocal, here are the parts that I need to support that vocal or not. So he was really prescient in his ability to arrange, like some of the great arrangers are. And then on top of that, I've since learned about the neurobiology of creativity. And Prince is what we would call a hypercreative. Hypercreative folks have a couple of circuits in the brain, mostly on the right-hand side, that are associated with creativity. So when we are thinking of brand new ideas, these circuits open temporarily to let us think of a new idea. And then as soon as we've thought of it, it slams shut and we switch from art over to craft. In some people, in folks who are hyper creative, those gates never close. They're broken. It's like broken circuits. They're open all the time. So Prince and one other musician whom I've worked with, who was also hyper creative, have these ideas that are just coming and coming and coming. And when his ideas were coming so quickly, one on top of the other, he had to be good enough on his instruments that we could do a song in a day, and the next day, another song and another song and another song, because that train just didn't stop rolling.
Yeah. Wow. How did it inform you? You obviously have to adjust to that because those type of people, I represented somebody a guy named Brian McKnight, who also had that multiple sort of multi-virtuosity kind of component and would literally do a song a day that oftentimes became the record, if not just 3/4 of the record. And people had to adjust to be in that space with him to not only foster that, but know when to be involved, when not to be involved. Was there a learning curve on how to work with Prince? It had to be.
Yeah, but it turned out, like with hindsight, I came to realize why I was ideally suited to be Prince's engineer. Now, I came to him as an audio technician.
Right.
So I had done a little bit of engineering, just assisting for other people. And I knew how the equipment worked because that's what I did. I repaired consoles and tape machines in Los Angeles when I started out, and I joined Prince as a technician. I was not an engineer. I had no experience whatsoever for all intents and purposes. But what was so perfect for him is that he could teach me his way of working. I had no expectations for how sessions would normally go. I didn't know what I didn't like drums. Yeah, it was a blank canvas. So he could shape me to learn to engineer his way. And in my naivete, as far as I knew, that's how most people did it. As Dylan Dresdow said, after I left Prince, it took a little while. There was an adjustment period to learn how most people make records. Now, if I had joined him as a more experienced engineer, we probably would have clashed. We would have banged heads because I would have said, no, everybody does it this way. Come on, Prince, you have to do it this way. But because I was naive, I didn't know any better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What's going on in the brain when I think a lot of people know this and actually use it. And you mentioned it in a video. Memory and memories of it's a rat's nest, memory, how it works and stuff. But when you combine song with memory, you remember things more. So like some of the guys that try to remember things, they associate it with a song, and then that keeps the memory, that makes your memory better. And that's been something I've always done my whole life. I don't have a great memory anyway, but how does that mechanism work, and how does that relate to creativity?
It's so cool. It's so cool how it works. So in our evolutionary past, our ancient evolutionary past, human beings, proto-humans, discovered that they could use their voices two different ways. They could use their voices to send a specific message about a specific thing, but they could also use their voices to broadcast to others what was going on with them and how they were feeling. So we evolved to have two different paths to process the audio that's coming in to our ears. One path is the information. Most of that is happening, for most people, it's happening in the left temporal lobe. Our language evolved to take advantage of that processing path. Words mean something specific, and that's information. But over in the other path, which is mostly in the right hemisphere, sound is interpreted in terms of its feelings, its emotions. So the intonation in our speech prosody, as well as melodies, are processed in terms of what they're broadcasting about someone's feelings. So we've got these two paths that are simultaneously active. When music listeners, some of them say, I never listen to the words. They're right. What they mean is they're activating that right path, and they're really ignoring the lyrics. Whereas other music listeners might say, if I don't understand the lyrics, if the message isn't right for me, I'm not interested in it. So we can do both. We can do one or the other. How that affects memory is that the auditory path is coming up through the brainstem, and it's before it arrives at that cortex, it's going through some circuits that are, as they say, richly endowed with opiate receptors. Sound is a special form of touch. Sound itself can cause us to release dopamine, to have certain feelings, strong, powerful feelings. So, as far as memory is concerned, you maybe you're an older person and you've got dementia. You can't remember the names of your kids. But when you hear a melody, those feelings are so automatic that it can trigger a feeling that you had, or maybe that your kids caused you to have, and that can help prompt memory.
So let me see if I understand this. So say I want to change Herb's mind about something, I should sing my argument to him? Is that what you're saying?
You can try. This is what I enjoy telling students. And I think the boys, especially in class, take notice of this when I talk about this, but maybe I'm being sexist here. Maybe the girls pay attention too. So you got your phone in your hand and you're holding it up to your right ear. And let's say your sweetheart is pretty angry at you and going, dun, 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 you never take me out. We never go anywhere. You're always hanging with your friends. Now, when signal is coming into your right ear, it is predominantly going to be processed first in your left hemisphere and vice versa, because the sensory organs cross over. Mm-hmm. So you're there with the phone in the right ear, and you're processing the words your girlfriend or boyfriend is saying. I tell them, take the phone, switch it to your other hand, put it here in your left ear. Listen to the intonation in her speech. Listen to the emotion she's trying to convey to you. And that is why panning matters. I was talking about this kind of stuff with Frank.
Whoa. Say that again. Say that again about panning.
Well, this is why the left ear, right ear, and the hemispheric specialization, left hemisphere, right hemisphere, and what they're each specialized for affects panning. Because if something's panned hard right, you're going to be processing it more as information. Whereas if something is panned hard left, you'll be processing it more in terms of its intonation, its emotion that's in there. You swap the panning and your impression of that record is going to change.
Wow.
I cannot wait to use panning in my next argument. When Aretha says to me, "What are you doing?" I'm saying, "I'm panning."
I'm panning.
Because I want to feel the emotion and the intonation of what's going on.
It matters.
It does matter.
I was talking with Frank Filippetti about this, and he said, He said, if you get your mix up, and if you think panic doesn't matter, listen to it in your headphones and then reverse your headphones. It sounds like a different song because of this hemispheric specialization.
Jason Joshua and I always used to... we always used to have our right ear facing the console and the speakers, and then we'd have the Pro Tools rig in front of us. And I always wondered why. I think I can't remember if he did it for me or I did it for him, but I did it for space concerns because I had this big thing. But if I hear what you're saying. I was using my good ear in a way to hear everything. I didn't hear panning though, but yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know about this, of course, until I went to college. But I know Prince taught me about the hi-hat, where the hi-hat always had to be, and where the rhythm guitar always had to be. And I know that personally, and when I'm mixing, I like panning things so that I'm getting the elements that I'm listening to the most, the elements that are rewarding me the most in a record, I'm going to pan those left. I'm going to pan the left. That comes in the left ear, and it's processed musically over here in the right. So for most listeners, music is processed in the right and speech on the left. So the things that I love musically the most, I'm going to tend to pan left. But if that guitar soloist is talking to you with that guitar, talking to you with that guitar, put it slightly right. Put it slightly right. Let it go to the speech area of your brain. Let it be heard as someone talking to you. Those things do matter.
Wow. The association with Prince is so defined as part of your history, but you must have gotten great experiences and learning lessons from David Byrne and Barenaked Ladies and stuff like that. Give us a sort of synopsis of how that also educated Susan Rogers on her path. Were there things that you learned and picked up or things that you brought to the game? Tell us about it.
I learned so much from all the people I worked with. And I want to say that I think one of the first and most important lessons I learned was even before Prince. I was assisting on a session at Rudy Records, a studio in Hollywood, Crossroads of the World, owned by Graham Nash and David Crosby. I was assisting the late great producer Gus Dudgeon, who had produced all those Elton John records. He was doing a Stephen Bishop record out there in LA. And he was a non-musician. And I asked him, Gus, how can you be a great producer and be a non-musician? And in his way, I think he was rolling up an English joint, and he says, why do I need to be a musician? Musicians are on the other side of the glass. They need a non-musician to listen like the average listener. And when I heard that, it was an epiphany. I thought to myself, maybe I could do this because I'm a non-musician myself. Maybe there is a space for the non-musician listener in the studio. So as my career went forward, I learned how other people hear music. And nearly all of the ones I'm working with were musicians, whether it was the producer Tony Berg, who was such a mentor to me, or it was like a David Byrne, or Geggy Tah, Tommy Jordan, the songwriter, singer, and Greg Kirsten, the his partner in Geggy Tah. I learned so much about music from those two highly trained musicians.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to think, though, that my listening profile, in combination with theirs, fleshed us out. I cannot literally, the non-musicians literally cannot hear music the same way that a trained musician can. The musical training in childhood develops the auditory path such that there are more axons, more dendrites. It's a more robust path. I can't listen the way a musician can. But they can't listen the way I can.
Okay.
I can listen like a non-musician. I can listen to the global whole. And having that perspective in the studio helps widen the possibilities for listeners out there in the world.
Remember when the A&M studios put I forget what car it was, in the back of the studio, and they ran cables from the studio so you could go out and listen the way a normal person riding in their car, a non-musician, would listen to, so you could get that perspective and have it inform your decisions.
Yeah, it's important.
Yeah.
Susan, you've got higher degrees than I do, so I have to defer to you, but I kind of disagree. I think that for most of my friends and most of my assistants, we do listen like musicians, and you can't help that. But I can't use the word trained, but what I try to do when I'm listening, like somebody says, hey, just listen to this, don't be an engineer. I try to remember my childhood when I didn't know anything about sound or anything at all, and what came through the speakers just almost made my heart stop. And so I try to recreate that ability, and I can't recreate it, of course, but I can pretend like I do, and it helps me be more objective as the listener. And I think that a lot of my friends are top engineers, and they do have the ability to listen as an average person. So I think it's a skill that possibly we can learn and practice. And you're the PhD over there. What do you think?
I think you're right about that. I think I know that I'm right about the non-musician's inability to hear music the way the trained musician does. I'm right about that because the science, the evidence supports it. We know there's a boatload now of evidence that shows how musical training in childhood develops the auditory path and the auditory cortex, and that's well established. But your point is just as likely to be correct, that the trained musicians can learn to dial that microscope back and listen to the big picture, what the scientists call listening synthetically rather than analytically. So I can only listen synthetically to the global whole, whereas the students at Berklee, they tend to listen analytically. They're taking 4 semesters of ear training classes, 4 semesters of harmony. They're taking conducting and arranging, all their private lessons. I can't hear the way they do, but they can teach themselves over time to hear the way I do.
Susan, tell us about the book you're writing. What's it going to be about? When can we expect it?
Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's an exciting thing.
Thanks for asking. I'm very excited about it. So my whole career, I've spent it helping artists to realize their vision and make their ideas manifest. But for the first time, I get to be the artist. I was approached in 2019 by a fellow, wonderful guy, Ogi Ogas, and he has written a lot of books, co-authored them with others. And he said, would you like to write a book on music? And we talked about it. And now I'm getting to express my ideas and my thinking on subjects. And he's acting kind of like my producer. And it's really wonderful. It's a book on music listening from 3 perspectives. Listening as a brain scientist, as a former record producer, and then listening as a non-musician. Describing what music sounds like, and not with the goal of getting people to understand what it sounds like to me, hoping to help people understand their own unique listening profile, why they like what they like, and what music sounds like to them.
Mm-hmm.
So these various chapters are drawing upon lessons that I learned while making records, lessons I learned in college, and then also many important lessons I've learned from my students, the young adults today who are making the music of tomorrow. They've taught me quite a lot about music listening.
Speaking of books, Susan, I read a book a long time ago that really helped me a lot. I would wonder if you would recommend it. It was Music, the Brain, and Ecstasy. Is that a good book to recommend for those of us that want to go deeper in this again?
Yeah, that's Robert Jourdain's book. It's the first one I ever read on music cognition right before I even started college. And that book is outstanding. In fact, the guy who wrote it, Robert Jourdain, he's not a scientist.
Yeah.
He's a really great writer. And that's a really wonderful book.
Yeah. You had to kind of put a little bit of a filter on some of his comments because he wasn't really into popular music, so much. And once you do that, I learned so much.
Yeah, I love that book. That book is really wonderful. There's good stuff out there. A lot of it is written for the experts, but my advisor, Daniel Levitin, wrote This Is Your Brain on Music in 2005, and that was a huge bestseller.
Yeah.
I hope that I can pick up the conversation where he left off and again, talk about individual listeners or help individual listeners recognize where their listener profile came from, what they hear when they hear music, why they like what they like. And the big thing that I'd like to get across is there is absolutely no call to be a music snob.
Yeah.
There simply isn't. All music is valid if somebody likes it, and somebody's bound to like it. Maybe not a lot of people, but somebody's bound to like it.
Susan, is there a difference from a gender perspective in how the brain processes things? And
great question.
And then specifically because when we started Pensado's Place 10 years ago, making sure that we were championing women in the space was really important to us. And we find that there is something brought to the table that is unique. It's always unique to every person, but it's not necessarily always gender. It could be your personal experience. It could be whatever you've gone through. Talk about gender and the brain and music.
Yeah, there are, just like in music, there are very few universals. One universal is octave equivalence. So humans and other animals as well regard two frequencies in a 2-to-1 ratio as being the same essential thing, which is kind of interesting. But almost everything else is not culture general, it's culture specific. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of the same way with gender. There are very few ways in which males and females process audio differently, but there are some ways. For one thing, estrogen affects hearing. Mm-hmm. So women have more of it than men. So women do hear slightly differently than men due to the presence of estrogen. The other thing is, this sounds so silly, but it's a thing. Women's heads are smaller than men. We're physically, on average, we're smaller. We have smaller heads, which means the delay between our two ears, left and right, spatial localization is slightly different for men and women because our heads are smaller. The path is smaller.
Wow.
There is, other than the presence of estrogen and the size of our heads, there aren't many differences between males and females. You guys might remember this. There was, years ago, the 70s and 80s, it was said that stereo salesmen knew that when a man walks in to buy a new stereo, you sell him the one with the best high end. And when a woman walks in to buy a new stereo, you sell her the one with the best low end. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's ever been tested or if it's true or not, but I know for me personally, it's all about that bass. It's all about that bass. And it has always been. And perhaps somebody will do studies on that and see if there is a kind of a frequency distribution that differs for men and women.
Yeah, I did a test of that theory, but I just did it in dating. So if you came over, let me just put on some low end stuff and have it play, and then I could keep my own chart of whether it was effective or not.
Oh, okay.
I'm keeping that data private for now.
Well, but did you see any results? Did the
boy, did I ever.
Yeah.
And I didn't know the panning trick when there was an argument. If I had that one, I'd be killing it.
You listened to a lot of Barry White, Herb.
Somebody did. That's for sure. Now there's only one bad part to this interview, which is Dave and I often feel stupid. And so in order for us to feel smart, we have to have you back on the show over and over and over again, because you never could get. It is fascinating that the art form that we all love and that has supported us and that we all celebrate and have contributed to and honored to be part of, to uncover the science of it when there's so much technological stuff going on, people forget to get to the root.
Yeah.
Like it's not just learn the plug-in, and it's not necessarily artificial intelligence. What is your brain doing? What happens? How does it inform you? And the ability to bring that to our audience is just a gift that we couldn't thank you enough for. And I hope you won't be bothered if we come back and say, hey, Susan, let's do a part 2.
Oh, anytime. There's so much fun stuff. And as I studied and learned about psychoacoustics and music cognition, so many times I thought, if only I had known that while I was making records. If only I had known that. Not that I'd make my decisions be different. It wouldn't change how I made records. It would just make my record making more informed. I just would know more of the why of the choices that I made.
Is your class available online? Can people take your course online?
Let's see. There's a course I wrote called Music Cognition. I don't teach it anymore, but it's taught by one of my colleagues through Berklee Online. Music Cognition is a course I wrote. We're rewriting it right now just to update it. And then also psychoacoustics is offered by Berklee Online, and those are open to everyone. Okay. I enjoy teaching them. It's fun stuff. And I know that the students who are taking those classes, they're not science majors. If they were science majors, they'd be taking them in other colleges and universities. They're record makers or DJs or record executives or music educators, and they want to know more about these topics to help inform their work.
Let me, for our audience, we always like our guests to sort of give their perspective. We got a young audience it's actually an audience that goes from young folks who are learning. We have a lot of legends like yourself who tune in, who find it interesting. Give us the Susan Rogers perspective to the audience that's listening.
When I give advice to students, sometimes they ask, what's the one piece of advice that if you could only give them one, what would it be? And that's know yourself. Know yourself. So a career isn't something you walk out into the orchard and pluck off a tree. A career is something that grows from inside you. So first of all, be highly attuned to your likes and dislikes. When a record lights you up like a Christmas tree and you love it, you love it. Your circuits, your reward-seeking paths are saying, more of this, give me more of this. You'll seek that your whole life. The sonic signature that you develop as a producer or a composer or a mixer or whatever, your sonic signature is going to be built from those records so that you can carry on that tradition. So be well attuned to what it is you like, and ultimately cherish that, value that, develop that. If you know what's going on inside, you don't have to worry about what's going on outside. You'll know where to go. You'll know what decisions to make. You'll know what records to take, what records to turn down, should you be so lucky as to have that much work. And it'll guide you your whole career.
Absolutely fantastic. Dave, wrap us up.
Susan said and corroborated the fact that humans are not really designed to like new things. But music can kind of override that in us. And in a moment in time where there's a lot of differences between the different parts of our cultures, and it's becoming an epidemic in and of itself, I think now's the time for musicians to really focus somewhat like the 60s and lead the way in terms of a pathway for both sides to understand and not be turned off by something different or something new. I didn't articulate that very well, but hopefully you can understand what I'm saying. We've got to solve this.
It is kind of interesting, someone just turned me on to, a student turned me on to the band Calle 13, and so good. They've been around for 15 years. In fact, they recently broke up. I think they formed in 2005 in Puerto Rico. It's just so good. And I recently learned about the band Tennyson, young teenagers, brother and sister, I think, out of Edmonton. And there's some new innovative work going on that I recognize cerebrally is brilliant, but I'm not bonding to it. The reason I'm not bonding to it is because I've got a whole lifetime, a library of music I love. Yeah. So when I hear Clarence Gatemouth Brown, when I hear Howlin' Wolf, that's the street I live on. That's my neighborhood. That's matching my template of what good is. Mm-hmm. And always will. So I can be cognitively open-minded and listen to some new music and go, that is fantastic. But as far as having that heart love to it and that bonding, feeling familiar to it, it's probably not going to happen. So I agree with you. Yes, we should be open-minded, but we shouldn't try to force the issue. I don't think music should be forced.
Well, music can sneak it in, that like Poor Dead in Ohio, Crosby, Stills and Nash. I mean, my generation stopped a war in Vietnam. My generation did a lot of work with music, and the generation today is way more capable of doing that than my generation. And I'd like to challenge people to try and start doing that more.
Absolutely.
Well, that is the beauty of what audience you are a part of, and that you've learned from Susan Rogers, and that fortunately you tune into our show. We have this incredibly powerful tool that affects our heart and affects our brain and affects us in ways we don't know. Honor that, service that, be open to it. Let it take you on this beautiful, beautiful journey. And everybody's journey is unique, but they're all beautiful. And be glad that you're in this space. It is absolutely a privilege. Susan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Herb. It's really nice to see you and chat. And I wish you all the best with the program. Continued success.